I've been on a mission to make effective guides for every single part of Roblox Pressure, and one of the modes I've been missing for a long time is 3 Nights at the Blacksite. This Five Nights at Freddy's inspired mode repurposes many of Pressure's entities into a chaotic set of nights. With Sebastian sneaking through the Blacksite, Corpse constantly lurking at your doorways, the Anglers rushing through, and Painter hindering your progress, 3 Nights at the Blacksite does not hold back. Although it may look confusing and overwhelming, once you break it down to a science, this mode is more than doable. In this video, we will finally be covering this insane mode, outlining 25 essential tips for mastering it. This includes important small details and strategies that can make or break your survival in this mode. These tips are most applicable for the most difficult versions of this mode, 420 mode and the secret Corpse Max mode, but they can help for any difficulty in any night as well. Without further ado, let's analyze and master 3 Nights at the Blacksite. The first tip of this guide is arguably the most important, all of Sebastian's camera locations. Although there are many threats, Sebastian is undoubtedly the star of them all, being the main threat that you are forced to have constant attention on. Here is every location and every single camera. As you look through these, keep in mind that Sebastian has only one location in these cameras always. You will never see him in 2 different locations in the same camera. This is unlike traditional FNAF games and honestly makes Sebastian loads easier, which is very helpful in harder versions of this mode. For instance, if you have a bunch of Sebastian pop-ups on your screen, you can prioritize the ones covering the specific Sebastian spots that are covered in certain cameras, which I'll explain in greater depth later. Memorize all of these camera locations and make sure you get good at recognizing them fast, as this is greatly necessary for survival. The next thing you should keep in mind about Sebastian is his specific movements throughout the night. He is always going to start in the top shop camera, which makes sense, but once he first moves, he doesn't go to any random camera. He progresses in set paths. These paths get complicated, but the main thing you need to know for now is that when Sebastian first moves, he will always move to one of the top 4 cameras, which are either A1, B1, B2, or C1, in the location shown in the last tip. For instance, if you see that Sebastian moved and had already checked A1, B1, and B2, this means he has to be moved to C1, which means as long as you get to that camera in time, you can flash him without having to make sure he's there. This is very helpful if Painter pop-ups get in your way, which we'll discuss here in a second. If for whatever reason you do not get to Sebastian in time, he will follow a set path based on the first camera he went to, which you can use to easily predict which camera he will be in next. As some examples, if you catch him in C3, he'll usually be in C2, and if you catch him in A2, you'll find him in A1, and so on. Use this to more properly anticipate where he will be and flash him accordingly. This tip is relevant as you're first starting to experience this mode. Something you should expect, a thing which is quite unique compared to other FNAF fan modes, is when Phone Guy discusses certain entities, that will be the very moment that those entities start becoming active. In most games, it's normally sometime around the time Phone Guy discusses it when they spawn, sometimes before, sometimes after. But in 3 Nights at the Blacksite, it's always when Phone Guy discusses it exactly. For example, the moment he discusses flashing the cameras, Sebastian moves. Once he describes Corpse, he becomes active. This means you can't be completely idle in the office while listening to him. Just keep in mind that this doesn't even remotely apply for any custom nights, including Corpse mode, only the first couple nights. Throughout the nights, Painter will spawn pop-ups on your camera screen to prevent you from effectively switching cameras, flashing, or finding Sebastian. In my experience, he typically shows up at the same time that other entities are moving or are active, which means that if you need to do something in the cameras, you have to deal with him ASAP in order to see whatever's going on in the cameras. And then after that, you have to deal with any other entities as soon as possible. You're forced to X out of each and every pop-up before you can see anything, but not necessarily before you can do anything. We will discuss this method soon, but for this tip, what I'll say, your most ideal approach for dealing with Painter's pop-ups are after you have already dealt with Sebastian or before Sebastian ever moves. Prioritize this instance and do your best to not get caught off guard, and in the event you do get caught off guard, focus on Xing out the pop-ups as fast as you can. Building off the last tip, another important note for Painter is working on precision with Xing out his pop-ups. This is really not going to matter if you're doing nights 1 through 3, it might matter on night 3, but it will definitely matter on the custom nights and Corpse night. Practice consistently and quickly Xing out his pop-ups, whether this means you're going to play some Osu, if you're going to do some aim practicers, or if you're just going to throw yourself at 420 enough times, find some way to practice so that Painter doesn't give you as much trouble. Painter's pop-ups come up randomly, and they often come up in inopportune times where you're also dealing with other entities. Although it is true that Painter's pop-ups will never be able to directly kill you, they can indirectly cause your death through making you lose Sebastian. This is why Xing out Painter's pop-ups are the top priority if you have not flashed Sebastian yet. However, if Sebastian is already dealt with, focus on dealing with other entities first and then Xing out his pop-ups in time for Sebastian's next movement. Attempt to multitask as well, in any situation where doing so won't jeopardize your attention on other threats. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're benefiting from the video so far. It's the most helpful way you can support the channel and will help me create more amazing videos and guides for you all in the future. Thanks for any and all support. Another imperative note about Painter is that his pop-ups can be clicked through. This is something that you have to account for in tense situations. It can also be taken advantage of. Here's an example. Let's say you suspect Sebastian is in camera C1, but you cannot see him as a result of pop-ups. Only X out the pop-ups that block his specific position in C1, then when you've confirmed he's there, click the flash button through the pop-ups. If you attempt to X out the pop-ups before flashing, you're risking Sebastian progressing, which you cannot afford to do in later modes. Don't take this for granted, as it can often save you in tense situations. Also, keep in mind, if you know for certain that he's in camera C1 using the previous example, you can flash him without Xing out any of the pop-ups. You just have to know the position of the flash button. Use this as well if you need it. In this tip, we'll go over every single node monster present in this mode, discuss their functionality, and how best to approach them. This includes Angler, Blitz, Frogger, and Pandemonium. Starting with the Angler, as he's the simplest, all you really need to do is be mindful of what side he's on and shut the door accordingly. This can be a great time to practice only shutting the door for a brief second at the last possible second, in the interest of saving power, but only do this if it is safe. As for Frogger, you obviously have to deal with the rebound, but it's absolutely crucial that you don't waste time over preparing for the rebound. It's great to be prepared, don't get me wrong, but since you have a relatively large amount of time between the first and second ambushes from Frogger, you should absolutely be using at least some of that time to address the other entities. That's why I highly recommend shutting the door quickly for the first ambush, quickly doing something like flashing Sebastian, and then turning back to be ready for the second ambush. Smart, right? Next is Blitz. Blitz I find to be very crazy in this mode, very fast, but you still have the double flicker as a warning, so it's not completely difficult. I find it always safest to play it safe even in the harder modes, but you can do this without taking up too much power. What I recommend is, after hearing his flicker, wait a couple seconds and then close either door of your choice. In this case I chose the left door. Close it and then immediately be ready to shut the right one and turn to that side. Have your ears ready to hear his audio cue. If he happens to go to the left door, great, it's already shut and you have nothing to worry about. If he goes to the right, your trigger finger is more than ready to close it. This strategy is much safer than just attempting to have fast enough reaction time, because most times you're probably not going to have enough, let's be honest, and that happened a lot with me, so no shame in that. It's still relatively power efficient to do this strategy as long as you time it right. Lastly, we have Pandemonium. Luckily, he's simpler. You only really have to be ready to shut the door at the right time. But for Pandy, you absolutely have to wait until the last possible second, especially in harder modes, to shut that door, because he literally sits at your door watching that power bar drain down before finally leaving. He doesn't just leave like the other ones do. Make an effort to shut and open the door at the most optimal times so that you're not wasting as much power as you could be. Aside from that though, that's all you really need to worry about in terms of node monster attacks. Just always be ready, pay attention to audio cues, and stay calm. You got this. It's time to get into more Corpse's exact functionality, more specifically his locations throughout the night. Now, understanding Corpse's locations isn't nearly as important as knowing Sebastian's locations, as not knowing his locations means certain death. That is not the case for Corpse, but for informational purposes, here's all Corpse's positions so that you know what to expect and to look for if you end up doing it. The first is him being far in the back of either hallway, the left or the right. As time goes on, he comes closer and, after some time, will be visible from outside your window. This is the beginning of the Corpse positions you should care about. As soon as you see Corpse in the middle of one of your windows, that's your official heads up that his next stage of movement is right outside your door. That is when you need to shut the door on him, not when he's visible in the window. Don't waste unnecessary power. As mentioned previously, since the two most important positions are visible without the cameras, you do not need to monitor him at all. Prioritize the last two positions and only look for Corpse if you're curious and can actually afford the spare time to check either hallway. Just keep in mind as well that in earlier modes or easier difficulties, it's possible he may be in none of these locations, having not even spawned yet. If you cannot find him, it's best practice to assume he's at your door and immediately check. That way you can avoid being booted off of the cameras and insta-killed. In this tip, I want to briefly discuss some small but useful details for you to keep in mind throughout your nights. The first is that the time of night is only visible in the cameras. This isn't a huge hindrance, but if you're used to other FNAF games, it's something you're going to have to get used to. It was for me. I suppose I got too used to seeing exact timers in modes like 50/20 mode and Ultimate Custom Night, I guess. Next though, a niche shortcut is, if you're playing on computer, pressing S to switch positions in the office. This can be a quicker way to move throughout the night if you prefer it over mouse. I'll use this time to say as well that I highly recommend doing this mode on PC, not on mobile or with a controller, but that's just my preference, and my recommendation. Lastly, an important note is that there are 15 cameras total, but only 12 of them are actually used to find Sebastian. The bottom ones are only used for Corpse. The next thing is that there are two badges you have access to, one for beating Night 3 and one for beating 420. Interestingly, there is no badge for beating Corpse mode. Corpse is one of the entities that you will likely forget about easily, which can end runs very quickly, but if you know what to expect when it comes to him, you should never have any issues. Corpse is visible in the hallway cameras, cam left and cam right, constantly making his way closer to your office as discussed before. The only position you have to actually worry about is the window positions and if he's at your door. If he is at your door, this is where you have to take action to avoid death. All you have to do is shut the door on him for about 3 seconds to make him go away. There are 3 things you should keep in mind when it comes to Corpse. Number 1, first, he's not very high maintenance. As long as you're aware of his important positions, you should never at any point waste time checking those cameras. Number 2, Corpse's positions, as you can tell, are completely enshrouded in shadow. He's easy to miss, especially at the doors. Because he cannot be camera stalled, it's especially important to get rid of him the moment he shows up at the door in order to avoid getting slammed by him. Number 3, if you're doing something in the cameras, be sure to check very quickly to see if he's there at the window. All it takes is a half-second camera flip for him to advance to the door, and after all, he cannot progress backwards. If you see him at the window, the next position will be at the door no matter what, so you have to get rid of him as soon as you can. It can be the difference between life and death. Aside from that though, that's truthfully all you really need to know about Corpse. Just be ready for him and you'll be just fine. Losing Sebastian on the cameras almost always means you're cooked, but you can still prevent a lost run. You just have to change your approach, especially if Sebastian is at max 20 difficulty. As soon as you've lost him, immediately assume he's in one of the farther back cameras, such as A4, B4, or C3, and immediately seek to flash him and find him. This is the right approach because you'd be surprised how quickly he can move through the Blacksite, especially on Corpse mode, even if you only just lost him. As soon as you can catch him once, you can follow his path and continue to flash him until he is back in the shop. For instance, if he is in B4, flash him until he's back in B1, and then eventually in the shop camera, you'll see him. Not all hope is lost, just be ready to switch gears. An interesting thing to note is that if you do back-to-back attempts, the first camera that you will see upon opening the camera is the last camera you were using before you died. This is a small tidbit of information. It may not have a ton of applicable actual value to any strategies, but it does help you know what to expect and saves you time from attempt to attempt once you first begin. An interesting thing to note is that even in Corpse mode, the max mode, you're able to safely stall in the office for a while before actually doing anything. I typically like to wait until I'm able to mute the call before opening the cameras. By then, the first flicker will have happened and Sebastian will be in the process of moving, which means I don't need to make any unnecessary movements too early. The most I do is go back to the shop camera to monitor Sebastian's first movement timing, and that's it. Don't overstretch yourself. Also, a related side note, the mute call button is pretty weird. I've always had to wait until the ringing stops to mute the call in the max mode, and in the previous nights I straight up was unable to mute. Not sure anyone else's experience, but that's what it was for me. Power management is imperative throughout the harder modes, but something to keep in mind is that cameras have zero effect on your power. Of course, flashing takes up a good chunk of usage, but actually watching the cameras does nothing. There is no shame in looking through them if you have time to in tense situations, and you should be if you lost Sebastian, because you could be seconds from dying. Just be cautious. Let's say Pandemonium is at the door and you have less than half power. You have to be careful that flashing Sebastian too many times won't put you at very low power while Pandy is still at the door. That would result in instant death. Just make sure you're always conscientious of your power usage. Here's another strategy that can help you know if Sebastian is there without actually seeing him. If you're just chilling on a camera, let's say A1 for example, and then notice it has static out of nowhere, this 9 times out of 10 means that Sebastian is about to show up. Wait to confirm that he actually showed up there and then flash him. This can also help if Painter decides to give you 30,000 pop-ups at the same time. Static can also mean that Sebastian just left a camera you were checking, which can help you locate it as well. Just make sure you aren't getting confused, because sometimes if you're on a camera that has static and then attempts to switch to another camera, the static effect from the previous camera will remain until it passes, even though you switched. Don't let this have you come to conclusions about the camera you switched to. It normally only applies to the one you were on. I hope that makes sense. Here's one more example to illustrate it. If I'm on camera C1 and Sebastian's there, if I get static once he moves and then switch to B2, the static effect remains. Now, I'm not going to assume that he just left B2 all because I saw static while looking at that camera. This is because that static came from C1 once Sebastian left his spot behind the railing. Instead, I'll be ready to find him closer to C2 instead of getting confused. I hope that makes sense. Use this tip to help you gain a better understanding of Sebastian's movements as well. We've talked so much about 3 Nights of the Blacksite so far, but what about how to even access this mode? You don't access it in the traditional way that you access the other modes, in the hallways with the conveyor belt. This mode is more hidden. Instead of going to the conveyor belts, you have to go through this side pathway all the way down to the stairs and through this last side path before you reach this completely empty dock. It is here that you find the mode. Go to the left after entering and you'll eventually find a blue Freddy with the pic of the game's thumbnail back from when this mode was first implemented. It's hiding in the shadows, which means unless you know exactly what you're coming for, it's likely that you're going to miss it. it. Stand on that picture and you'll be teleported to the mode. Personally, I love how hidden and far from spawn this is. It took me a hot minute to find this on my own once I finally decided to cover this mode, and it was all part of the fun. But be sure to remember this path if you plan on taking this mode seriously. If you're observant while playing this mode, you'll notice a couple inconsistencies about this mode that are interesting to note. First off, the anglers are grouped together, all shown within the custom night screen, but you may notice that Pandemonium is grouped with them, still called an angler. This is actually slightly inaccurate, as, of course, Pandemonium is not an angler. He is a separate entity. Regardless of this, his AI system is modified in the same way as all of the other anglers, which I think of as an interesting choice. I consider him an extra entity to the 420 mode experience. Aside from this, Pinky and Chainsmoker are not present in this mode. I think both could be very unique additions to the mode, providing a very unique challenge to anglers and making them more high maintenance and more challenging. But we only have Blitz, Frogger, and the normal angler. Maybe this will be changed later, unlikely, but who knows. The last thing is small Easter eggs. The main one is exotic butter reference at the bottom, an obvious reference to sister location, which I really appreciate. There's also a rare voice line that Sebastian has when you flash him. Aside from this though, there's not much else. This may have something to do with the fact that this mode was created in less than a week. Honestly though, I think what we have, considering it was only a week of development, is very impressive. This is a lot. This next tip has to do with the animations in this game. After flashing Sebastian, opening or closing a door on anglers or corpse, or even while pop-ups are beginning to show up, you do not have to be there to witness the entire animation of these things. You can turn to your next task without worrying about it. This helps a lot when managing multiple threats. The best application of this concept would be flashing Sebastian once you find him, and then immediately turning back to check for corpse, for example. You can apply this however you'd like, but this sort of strat is basically mandatory. Flashes take up a good chunk of your power in a similar way as holding the door shut for corpse does, for example, but there's a key difference with its usage you should know. All sources of power usage are able to completely deplete your power bar and cause you to need to recharge. The only exception is flashes. You have to have a certain amount of power, around this much, in order for flashes to even be usable in the first place. This is both a good and a bad thing. Good in that flashing will never ever be the direct cause of a complete loss of power. Bad in that this could easily prevent you from flashing Sebastian in time if you've had inefficient power management. This is why saving every little bit of power truly helps. It can be the difference between having enough to flash or not, or having enough to outlast Pandemonium. Once a flicker happens, you have a small amount of time that you can use to your advantage, even if it's Blitz. The time can be used to X out pop-ups, quickly find Sebastian, or shut the door on corpse quickly. Just don't overuse this time. It's not as much as you'd think, but that does not mean it can't be used. It's around 4 to 5 seconds that you can use however you see fit. Using these could genuinely be the difference between surviving and not surviving. Try to make it a habit to always be doing something during that time. You may be wondering, what happens if I lose all of my power? Well, it's absolutely not good, but it normally doesn't mean you're dead immediately. What it does mean is that anything that requires power will be temporarily unusable until the power charges back to at least half. If this happens, you basically have to rely on luck to not get clapped. If an entity comes that requires power to remove, your best bet is to pray stalling them as possible until your power is usable again. If not, then RIP. You should always be avoiding losing power completely and should treat it as a guaranteed death to get yourself in the practice of avoiding it. If you're at 5 AM and lose track of Sebastian, you're not entirely screwed. Even if he shows up behind you, you can stall for time and attempt to reach the end of the night. The nights last about 6 minutes, meaning each hour is about 1 minute. So if you've been at 5 AM for what feels like a while, you can just face the cameras and not actually turn around once Sebastian shows up in your office. This buys you time. This is possible because Sebastian requires you to be facing him in order to shoot you and end your run. Eventually, the game will force you to turn around after a while, but this does not happen immediately. This tech could be just enough to get you to the win. The only thing that could get in the way of this is corpse. Depending on a corpse's positioning, if he's at the door and his kill timer reaches 0, he could force you to turn around earlier. But that doesn't mean this tech isn't possible. Attempt to use this if you ever need to, and pray luck is on your side. Make sure that you're able to properly hear which side of the office the anglers are on. Whether this means having your audio on really loud, having headphones on, or anything else, make sure that whatever you choose gives you just enough audio to survive. In my opinion, playing with headphones is basically mandatory to being fully aware of everything going on. For instance, hearing a painter spawns pop-ups while you're not looking at the cameras, hearing camera static, or hearing a flicker while you're on a camera that does not visually show flickers. It's imperative to always be ready, and these additional sound cues that you will hear if you have good enough audio or headphones will help so much in your runs. The last tip I think is very important for staying consistent is never going too fast. It's very easy to forget certain entities or cameras or processes that are crucial to winning, and not to mention, nerve control towards the end can be all over the place, especially if you're going for 420 or corpse mode. Make sure you're constantly having brain space for each entity so you never forget them, and focus on practicing enough that you get into a zone. Once you find that rhythm, it's easy to go for attempts and know exactly what to expect and win consistently. And of course, try to have fun. This mode, in my opinion, is incredibly enjoyable. There is something super super satisfying about flashing Sebastian and getting that successful sound cue and visual cue that you're playing correctly, for example. And feeling on top of all the entities and in control of everything going on feels amazing as well. Try to find this vibe for yourself. It will make the grind much easier. And just like that, you've made it to the end of the guide. If you've watched this far into the video, I want to give you a special message saying thank you so much. Your support truly helps so much with growing my channel and helping to expose my guides to more people that could benefit from them. The littlest form of engagement truly helps infinitely. Aside from that, I hope this video has been entertaining and beneficial. All of these tips come from my own personal experience. Let's just say that I definitely have experienced everything this mode has to offer, and I can't wait to discuss it all in my next video. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that, and so you can be a part of future Roblox Pressure journeys on this channel. Thank you for accompanying me today in this video, and until we hopefully cross paths again, live well and have a great rest of your day.